So, First John is what he was talking about and doing motions to, which I will spare you and not do this morning. But First John was written by a man named John who walked with Jesus. And so at this point, as John is writing this, there was a movement happening in the church where they began to believe that anything material or anything in this world is evil and everything unseen and heavenly is good. And so some actually believed that Jesus wasn't an actual physical person. He was actually, some believe he was a ghost or like a phantom. And so as you read First John, as you read John's letter, John talks a lot about the physical nature, attributes, and then ultimately sacrifice of Jesus. And it's intentional because there were people saying that Jesus wasn't really a human at that point. And so he drives all of this home. But the thing is, the reason why John could write about that is because John spent 3 years. He spent 3 years with Jesus, walking beside him, seeing him do miracles. He spent 3 years hearing the teachings of Jesus and watching him and seeing him and physically interacting with him. It's because of that John came to believe undeniably that to claim to love God meant that we must love those that God loves. He ultimately saw that because of what Jesus did, that we are called to love in the same way. And so as you read John, as you read his letter, as he wrote it, there's little about feelings. There's not a ton about these fuzzy feelings of love. It is actually mostly action. And why? Because he literally watched Jesus die on a cross. He saw him die on a cross. Jesus didn't pay for sins by his fond feelings and his compassion. See, John's sin cost Jesus his life. Our sin cost him his life. So it was Jesus' sacrificial display of love that paved the way for John's sin to be erased. And so because of that, he writes this, 1 John 3:16. He says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." So when we say like, I love tacos, or I love gujitsus, or if you know what those are, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Or I love video games, or I love sports. We can say all these things about love, but here's what John says. Here's how you know what love is. Love is simply Jesus laying down his life for us. What does that mean? John says the ultimate way that we know how to identify and call love is what Jesus did for us, that he went to the cross and he gave his life for us. And so he says, because of this is what love is, then our response to that should be that we do the same things for our brothers. People talk about love in lots of different ways, but John says love isn't a feeling, it's action. You see, for John, undisplayed love was not love at all. You've heard a phrase before like, I forgot to do it, but I really thought about it, and someone say, well, don't worry, it's the thought that counts. With love, it's actually not the thought that counts. It's the follow-through that counts. And so he's talking, and then he continues to go on, verse 17, and he says this, if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? So that word pity simply means a closed or hardened heart. So what John's saying is, when you are sitting with someone and they begin to share a need, or they begin to, maybe you hear it as complaining, or you see someone that you are driving down the road, or maybe at school when you walk beside them and they drop their books or they drop something, or maybe you can just tell that they're upset. What John says is when we walk by them or when we sit with them and we hear their need and we become hardened to that and say things like, well, you probably deserve it. You know, you made the decision and now it's the price to pay for your decision. Or we ask, do they really need that? Or we say, just get over it. It's not that big of a deal. John says, if that happens in our heart, it's evidence that the love of God is not in it. And so what does he do? He connects these two thoughts, the love of God, the love of God, the love of God, thanks. with, you're good, the love of God with, we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. He connects these two thoughts, and he says they're interchangeable. And so if you love God, the response is that whatever you feel like you want and need, it comes second to what someone else needs. If you love God, when you see a need, you don't walk past it, and you don't try to justify it or explain it, or you don't victimize it. Like he says, if you love God, then our hearts are not hard, and we ask, how can I help? Instead of, I wonder what they did to get themselves in that position. For John, loving people is loving God. And because people are loved by God, refusing to actively love a brother or sister is the equivalent of refusing to love God. You see, when Jesus is asked, okay, Jesus, what's the most important commandment? He gives us two, right? If you grew up in church, if not, this is what he says. He says, the two most important commandments are love God and love others. And so when we hear this, we think of two. One, two. Some of us place one, and some of us place one above the other, but it's really two equal things, right? We say, okay, these two things are the most important things. What does it come down to in life? Love God and love others. And he quantifies, he tells us this is what love is. Love is laying down your life for someone. Love is not a feeling. Love is not what you want. Love is sacrificially laying down your life for someone. And so we see it as, okay, the two things I'm supposed to do is I'm called to love God and love others. And so some days we think, okay, well, I'm doing a really good job at loving others but not loving God. And other days we say, like, I'm really doing a great job at loving God, but I'm not doing a good job at loving others. And John just is like, I just want to expose this. It's not loving God and loving others. It's that we love God by loving others. And so they are one and the same. Now, why does this matter? Well, because in a few days, many of us are going to experience some form of Thanksgiving. Who loves Thanksgiving? Okay, yes. Anybody love Thanksgiving more than Christmas? I see, okay, we got some people in here. Okay, yeah, all right, anybody appreciate Christmas music just after Thanksgiving? My people, okay, that has nothing to do with anything. I just had to get it out. All right, so this week, many of us, in some form or fashion, are going to sit at a table. We're going to come to the table. And for some of us, we're going to come to a table, and it's going to be surrounded by a lot of people. And at that table, and maybe a few people, or maybe this year it'll just be a table and you'll be there, but you'll have a chance to interact with someone throughout that day. And undoubtedly, somebody at that table or in your life has done something to hurt you, to upset you. In fact, this whole week you've been thinking, how can I come to the table and be ready to defend myself for what happened? How can I come to the table and be ready to throw some passive-aggressive comments their way? How can I dish up just cold, hard revenge? How can I come to the table and make it about me? What can I get out of this week? And what Jesus says is, you know what, you can come to the table and you can bring some food, you can bring a dish, or maybe even you can come to the table and right now you're planning on bringing, like you've already recounted 5 different times about how that conversation is going to go and what's going to be said. And here's what Jesus says. And I'm not trying to discredit or discount what's been done to you, how you've been hurt. But here's what Jesus says, is when you come to the table, the best thing that you can bring to the table is love. The best thing. The best thing that you can bring to the table is not a feeling. It's not warm and fuzzy and all those things, I don't know what this is, but it's there. It's actually you coming to the table this week with family, friends. Maybe it's just a text message or a phone call or FaceTime. It's you coming to the table and not asking, what can I get out of this? But asking, what can I give? What kind words can I share? Maybe this is the year that you come to the table with forgiveness. Maybe this is the year that you come in and say, I just want to serve everyone at this table. Say, well, you don't know what they've done. Well, if we play this out right, like what if Jesus would have played that card? You don't know what you've done to me, so I'm not going to lay down my life. And he doesn't. He says, John says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus, physical, his physical body was broken. And why? Because he loved us. And so we go to that extreme in our hearts and our minds and in our actions to lay down our life for the people that God loves. And just to be clear, God loves everyone that's going to be at that table. Everyone that's in your life.